The to be Hey Hockey World, welcome to the to be named later show. Sorry about that earlier, but this is what I wanted to do is I wanted to get a chance to interview some of the greatest hockey writers that we have, and there's no better hockey writer to start this whole thing with than my close friend and Kevin Allen of the USA Today. Hey, Kev.
Hey there. Happy to be here.
So I get a chance to. We do shows together all the time, so it's going to be interesting. I get a chance to interview you back and forth here. So Kevin is receiving an award this coming weekend. Now officially, this award is you're actually getting yourself into a part of the Hockey Hall of Fame. I mean, this is amazing.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, it's officially the Hockey Hall of Fame is honoring me with the Elmer Ferguson Award, which is given to a writer every year, and then they also honor a broadcaster with the Foster Hewitt Award as well, and that's going to Pat Foley, who is the longtime Chicago Blackhawks broadcaster, and there'll be a luncheon on Monday. Which is be a few hours before the players get in, and then at night we'll be there, and we'll also be introduced there as well. So I'm very emotional about it. I've told some friends, they asked me how I felt about it, and I said, well, you remember Teemu Selanne? He won the Stanley Cup, and he was overcome for emotion for about 15 or 20 minutes as he sat on the bench. Well, I've been like that for about 5 months.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
and I mean, you've never been this. You've never really been the story. You've always covered the story, so that's got to be an interesting angle for you.
Yeah, no, that's yeah. I mean, it happened to me last fall too when I won the Lester Patrick, and I mean, it really was strange. I was standing up, and the media was there, and I said, what are you guys doing here? I said, if I was here covering it, I would never interview me, So like, what are you doing? Like, generally the story of the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame when the Lester Patrick was given is the guys that are there. So.
Yeah.
I was surprised that they were, they wanted to talk to me, and everybody always asked me, my favorite stories, and I really just don't have an answer for that. Like, I don't think writers think in those terms. My memories about being in the journalism world aren't necessarily about the stories. I mean, I've had some scoops. Probably the biggest was Mario Lemieux's comeback when nobody knew, and I was able to break that. And that was at really the fun aspect of that. It was at the start of the website era.
Yeah.
And we made the decision to put it on the website as opposed to in the newspaper. And prior to that point, getting a scoop in the newspaper was a much bigger deal because you'd learn about it in the afternoon, you wouldn't see it till next morning. But I found out that Mario Lemieux was coming back, and we were able to put it on the website. And the fun story about that was the Penguins found out that I knew, and that I was going to put it on the website, and they told Mario that the news had gotten out, and he said who got it, and they were told that Kevin Allen had it, and he basically laughed and said, give him an hour. So they allowed me to stand alone out there for an hour before they confirmed that he was coming back. And I mean, it was to me, that was kind of a special moment. It was kind of a tip of the cap from Mario that he respected that I had gotten a scoop, and let me have it for a while before they did confirm that he was indeed coming back.
That must have been a fun hour. I can imagine that in that hour, how many calls you got and how many people, because people know you're not one to put out rumors. And
right. Yeah, I mean, that was the other issue too. I saw. I actually heard on radio some of the writers when they were sorting out what had happened, and the big question is who had it, and then when people heard it was me, they said, "Oh, well, then it's true," And right. I thought, well, that was a good.
There's no higher praise. That's
exactly right. So, I felt pretty good about that. But, to be honest, I've probably written better stories, and I've had other moments. But it's just hard to kind of sort them out. I've written a few stories in my time.
Yeah.
You know, I remember thinking the other was like last year, like how many words I had written because I had written 3 books and you know, I had my regular deals, and I thought, you know, I thought I was approaching about 1 million words that year. So,
that
you
year.
know, it
So I
was
really,
about 85,000 words. So 3 of them was you know, 250,000. So you know, it's
oh
uh,
my gosh, that's a lot. I mean, I think the respect for you is unanimous. I mean, and having get a chance to hang out with you and see you at these different events. There's no, you don't seem to have an enemy in this hockey world, which is really hard to do when you've been, especially when you've been you've been the president of the Professional Hockey Writers Association, so you've had to be combative with people because you've had to fight for yourself and the others that you represent. But you honestly don't seem to have any enemies.
well, I mean, I have battled a few times, but you know, that's really not my personality. I think. And early in my career, I had to apologize. You know, when your glass is always half full, and you're a journalist, in the early years, you almost had to be apologetic about that. I mean, they want more aggressiveness, but you know, I never really did. That's just the way I see the world. And you know, when a young journalist asks me about how I think, what's the secret, and I say, be respectful and be fair. And that's kind of how I live my life, and that's how I practice journalism. And I think if you do that all the way through, it's hard for people to have any sustained hatred for you. I mean, I try to be respectful. I try to think about the impact of the stories I write on people's lives, and sometimes you're going to still have to write things that are negative and that people aren't going to like. But if you at least give some thought, pay some homage to the idea that you're impacting people's lives, I think you at least sort of mitigate the damage you do to the relationships. I mean, I've written some negative things about people, and we still get along. That's why I have admiration for Gary Bettman. Is that I've written things that Gary hasn't liked, and yet when I see him, he still treats me with the same measure of respect. He doesn't hold a grudge. We've agreed to disagree, and
Right.
I remember writing, and I was wrong that they should have stayed with ESPN. And I understood.
Yeah.
I understood for sure that it wasn't a good setup for us. That ESPN, didn't really give the respect to the hockey world that it should have, in my opinion. But I thought, can you really be a sport if you're not with ESPN? And I wrote a column to that effect, and Gary disagreed and told me that. And yet, the next time I saw him, we were still fine, and I could still answer him questions and all that. And then when it became clear that it was a great deal when he went to NBC Sports Network, I actually went and told him. I said, you were right and I was wrong. That's why you get paid all the money you do, and why I'm a writer.
Well, that's the interesting thing about these people, and what must be difficult, because you're a friendly guy, and there are hockey writers out there that we do this show called the Cranky Hockey Writers Show, and the joke about it is that neither of us is really very cranky, and neither is Eric Duhashek. We pretty much are just, we get it, we enjoy what we do, and it's you are that way to a degree where I'm sure you build a lot of friendships, and then you have to cover these friends. Even though I know professionally you try to try to keep that line, but there's no question that it has to have been hard, if on a few occasions, to write stories about some people that you cared about as people.
Oh, for sure. And I'll give you a real good example. Is Don Waddell, I've known for years. I'm a native Detroit area person. Don's from Detroit. We're relatively the same age. We get along great. He's a good human being, but his Thrasher teams weren't very good, and they didn't do a good job building that team. And there were times when I had to say that, and yet I see Don a lot, and I like Don and everything else. So, but most of the guys in the NHL are professional, and they get it. If you're professional in your approach, and it's not a personal attack. You don't say that Don Waddell is a bad human being. He just didn't get the job done in terms of building that team into a winner.
Right.
And when you say it in that manner, and I think they have more respect for you. And at the end of the day, if Don was on this podcast with us, I think he'd say, yeah, I should have done a better job of building that team.
Yeah, I mean the people in the NHL that I respect the most are the ones who will admit they're wrong, and and also will have fun with you when you're wrong, like you've had in these situations, like with Gary Bettman and such. I love those stories, and to hear that. And I think one of the things that you've managed to do that is eight headlines, along the way.
Yeah, I just lost you there for a minute.
Sorry.
Can you repeat
Yeah.
that? It froze up.
Yeah. So what I was saying was, it seems like you've never given into the link bait type concept of headlines. Of headlines that are controversial for controversy's sake. And that seems to. I think a lot of that. Obviously, that's why you have the respect of these people. But have you felt the pressure of that through the years?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, now in particular, what we're writing is different, for sure. And I just because I had to write my Hall of Fame speech, and I actually sort of talked a little bit about this. My style as a journalist, like I'm more of a storyteller, and I think that I like going to an event and making my determination on what's important and what's not important, to give my take on it and to sort of tell everyone what's happened and to put it into perspective. And that's really not in vogue anymore. We're more into analysis now. I still think there's room for storytelling, but I think we want more hardcore analysis on what happened. So I've had to adjust my style, and that's not I wouldn't say that was necessarily the way I like to do it, but I'm capable of doing that, and I've had to do that. But what I haven't done is I haven't sort of compromised my ethics for hits. Certainly I know now what teams I can write about to get the most hits.
Sure.
And yet I don't always. I mean, I'm cognizant to the point where I know that the people want to read about Sidney Crosby, and people want to read about Alex Ovechkin. People want to read about the Penguins or the Rangers, but I don't write all that. There's less of a marketplace for the Florida Panthers and for the Arizona Coyotes, but I don't not write about those teams. I mean, I try not to let it impact or compromise how I view what I should write. So, I mean, I think you have to think about those things.
You do, and I think one of the things that is interesting about you is there's a bit of a dichotomy going on with you, and I've seen it in two things specifically. One is that you are a storyteller, and you love a good story. You love a funny story. You love an interesting story. I love to tell stories to you. We have really a lot of fun telling stories to each other, but you write for the USA Today. We have very limited space to tell stories. And how's that been as far as, do you find it helping your creativity?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, the website has opened things up, obviously, but for the newspaper, it's a lot harder. And I always used to say it was fascinating that all of the writing ability that I needed to get to USA Today, I stopped having to use. I mean. In my early younger days, I wrote 2 and 3 paragraph leads, and I stopped having to do that the minute I walked in the door at USA Today. And there's a story about too that because I've been taking walks down memory lane recently and having discussions about my career, and I remembered it's sort of interesting about why I wanted to get to USA Today. I was actually first there on loan. I worked for the Port Huron Times-Herald, and the oddity of my journey to be the hockey writer is that I became the hockey writer because they liked how I wrote baseball. And the story is that I had covered the 1984 Tigers, and Gannett, which owns USA Today and 90 some other papers, picked up a lot of my baseball stories and put them on the wire, and I sort of developed a reputation that, hey, maybe this guy is sort of moving up and we got to look for him. It's kind of like being in Double-A ball and everybody's sort of watching you thinking, well, maybe he can get to the majors. Right. And so I went on loan to USA Today for 4 months, and I show up on a Sunday and they say, hey, take Cindy McConkey's desk, and she's covering a USFL game. So I plot my stuff down on her desk, and within 60 seconds of the time I sat in her desk, the phone rings. I pick it up, and I said, this is Cindy McConkey's phone, and they said, hi, I'd like to speak to Cindy. And I said, well, she's in Memphis covering a USFL game. And he said, okay, just tell her that George Steinbrenner returned her call. So I put the receiver down, I turned to the guy next to me, and I said, I have to work at a place where George Steinbrenner returns your call on a Sunday afternoon. And I decided right then I needed to get back to USA. I mean, I needed to get there full time.
Yeah.
The way the rules were at that time is that there had to be a proper mourning period before you could be rehired. So they sent me back to Fort Huron. I went back to the minors.
Right.
And, I wrote some more baseball, among other things. And, there was some discussion about, not discussion, I was offered a chance to go to work in Florida and cover the Miami Dolphins and so forth. But I didn't end up going there. I had some family issues. My mother was ill. But somehow I ended up, and I say somehow because, one of the deals I had cut them is I wouldn't be applying for any other jobs. But I did. I applied for the baseball writing job at the Detroit Free Press, and I got to be a finalist. And I had just won an award for my coverage of spring training, the AP Sweepstakes Award, and I got to be a finalist. And I told my wife, this is just crazy because they're going to be mad at me if I don't get this job because I've applied. And I said, she goes, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I think I'm just going to go fess up. And so I did. I walked into the editor's office and said, I don't know how this happened, but I'm a finalist for the baseball writing job at the Detroit Free Press. Now, the Free Press was not a Gannett paper like it is now. Back then, it was, as a competing newspaper. So, the editor said, you don't know how it happened? Well, I said, well, I do know how it happened, but I didn't mean for it to happen. And she said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go back to USA Today. So she got USA Today on the phone, and they offered me a job. And this was all over about a 10-minute period. I pull out of the baseball job. I go to USA Today. Now, I'm thinking I'm going there. I'm probably going to write baseball, but, they got like a gazillion baseball writers. And so now I'm like a general assignment writer until they kind of sort out what to do with me. And what I didn't know at the time is they had no hockey writers. Now, I had covered hockey at the Port Huron Times-Herald. The training camp for the Red Wings was held there. I covered Yzerman's, draft. I covered Yzerman's first training camp. I'd covered some games. They were in the playoffs. One season I was there, and I covered the playoff deal. So I had covered some hockey, but nobody knew that. I was known for my baseball stuff. And but Rod Beaton, who was the former hockey writer, was a baseball guy. And one day Henry Freeman, the sports editor, walks through the office, and Rod knew he had been looking for a hockey writer but hadn't found anyone he liked. And he said, and this was his quote, he said, Henry, why don't you let Kevin cover hockey while you're trying to find a guy? Because he's from Michigan, he speaks hockey fluently. Henry said, do you speak hockey fluently? And I said, I do. And a little while later, I said, well, sort of temporarily cover this while I'm conducting my search. And I have been the temporary NHL writer for the last 29 years.
Still, any day now they're going to put you on the baseball beat. Any day.
I could end up back at any point, so I'm on.
That is such a great story. I mean, now to get to that point, I had a couple questions. You had a very interesting upbringing, kind of like a humble beginning to a degree, and tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I mean, I never mind talking about it because there's always a great political debate about the value of providing federal assistance for the disadvantaged.
Yeah.
And the reason I don't mind talking about it is because, people always want evidence that helps to throw money at a problem. Well, I'm the evidence. I grew up in a single-family household. I never knew my father. I had federal grant money, Social Security. I lived on welfare. I had food stamps. You name it, and I went through it. And I turned out all right. And without that advantage, would I even be here? So anyway, I think it's sort of colored my political thinking, to be sure. And I think the idea that it takes a village, I believe in that because I lived in a middle-class city. I hung out with middle-class kids. I was not middle class. I was poor.
Right.
But I've got middle-class values. And I sort of, how people who are my age, you were sort of raised by all the mothers in the neighborhood. To be honest, I never really felt disadvantaged because right. Everybody was there. So that was my background. But when I went to college, I got financial aid. I remember filling out the forms, and basically when it said household income, I got to put zero. We didn't have household income. We just had,
Wow.
federal assistance, and my mother, who, had very limited education. After I turned 18, she didn't have Social Security anymore. So, then she actually went on welfare, full time. So,
Wow.
I don't know. Everybody's political views are different on that, but
Sure.
I always, when people ask me about my story, I tell them that because I think everyone, who has an opinion on it, some of it is based on the fact they don't think it works, and it did work for me.
It worked for you, yeah.
It didn't. I wouldn't have gotten to where I am now without that.
That's an amazing story. And now your mom, she obviously made some smart choices for not being educated. She sounds like she got you into the right situations.
Yeah, no, we did. And I actually benefited. In the 1960s, they had a urban renewal sort of drive during the Kennedy administration or Johnson. I can't remember which. And there was government-sponsored housing units, and one of the requirements was that one of them had to go to a single-parent family, which there weren't a lot of those in the 1960s.
Sure.
And in our little community, I remember them actually coming. We were living with my grandmother, and they basically recruited us as a rare single-parent family to go into this unit. And same thing. I went to a parochial school, which stuns people, considering that we didn't have any money. But St. Vincent de Paul, which was a charitable organization, had one scholarship. Well, I was living in a middle class area. I was it. So I ended up, getting a scholarship and went to a parochial school. Really got a advantage out of that. I felt. I had a very inspirational nun. She didn't whack me on the fingers or anything like that in the 8th grade. Who convinced me that I could be more than I probably believed I could. Wow. And she had an amazing impact on my life. She knew I wanted to be a writer, and I don't know that she totally convinced me, but she got me believing that all things were possible. So
that's awesome. What time? So when did you decide you wanted to be a writer? Was it and did you have? I know a lot of people who were writers became writers because they were first readers and they found somebody that just kind of inspired them. Was there somebody like that for you?
Well, I was a pretty heavy-duty reader when I was young, for sure. But the real honesty is when I couldn't hit Glenn Ambrose's curveball, which made me realize, of course, that I had no future as a big-time athlete. And I love sports. I was a hardcore baseball fan. I took the bus down to Tiger Stadium when I was a very young. This was at a time when you could be 10, 11, and 12 and get on a bus and go 20 miles and
Right.
see a game. And obviously, I was a big Red Wings fan, Gordie Howe. Well, I needed a way to stay close to that, and I also like to write. So I thought, well, I'll merge my two passions. Now, when did that occur? I started thinking about being a writer when I was like in second and third grade. While everybody else was going to be a fireman. And then, as I said, as I got older and I realized my athletic talents were not anything remotely, I wasn't even a good youth player. So I thought this was an opportunity for me to sort of stay close to sports. And I just thought, wow, and I still say that today, and that is that, the last 30 years, look at all the things I've seen, in the hockey world.
Yeah.
But also, I've covered Super Bowls and NCAA Final Fours. I've been to NASCAR races. I've been to, multiple Olympics. I've interviewed, presidents. I did interviewed Al Gore at the 1996 Olympic Games one-on-one. I interviewed Michael Jordan one-on-one, Nadia Comaneci. I've done so many things in my career, and I get paid to do it. Like, it's really a remarkable thing. It's a heck of a way to make a living, and I always find it interesting that when I'm with a group of people and we start to swap stories about what we do for a living, I could be with doctors and lawyers and Indian chiefs, and everybody want to talk about what I do.
Yeah, that's something, isn't it? That's awesome.
So, I never lose sight of that. Like, I feel privileged and lucky that I've been able to make my living in this way.
Does any of you ever want to maybe end your career covering baseball?
No, not at all. That ship has sailed. And baseball was hard, to be honest, more difficult. I don't mind saying that. This was the 1980s, and I had some tough moments. I had a tough moment with Rod Carew. I thought, Dave had a run-in with Dave Kingman. There was, I've had all the, the stereotypical moments as well. Where, I remember going to the ballpark and having to do a little bit of an early story, and you'd sort of size up who was in a good mood because that's who you were going to write about for the early story that, just held your space. And, I never had those moments in hockey. That's generalizing a little bit, but I can count on, one hand and the number of difficult moments I've had as a hockey writer. And to be fair, though, I always said this about baseball. People ask me why it's so much tougher, and I thought, well, a lot of it is the number of games. Like, can you just imagine in your work environment, if I covered you at every day, and then I would meet with you after your day of writing your blog and your podcast, and I'd say, today's podcast, you've been in a slump for a week. How do you explain that? So I sort of get that when you're doing that 162 days, the most plus spring training, like, those guys can get a little cranky. Like, and I tried to be respectful of that. Now, I never was in that. Like, I never covered all 162 games. I was never a beat writer. I didn't get that job. I moved on, and I was covering, like, in '84. I probably only covered 30 games or 35 games, something like that, and then the playoffs. So I never really sort of experienced that. But if I had already made up my mind that I was going to basically give players the benefit of the doubt for that reason. Like, I just think that's a lot of time to spend. It's the same thing with marriages. Like, you're the same person every day. Well, you're going to have, issues if you're there, every day. And so, I think you have to sort of take that into account when you're developing relationships, the number of days you're with these people.
And it really does, the people I've talked to in baseball have a very different relationship covering especially baseball, because of the everyday aspect. They are almost part of the team in a different way. They know things. They know way more things than they can write about, it seems like. baseball writers, that I've talked to, they just, because there's no avoiding if you're trying to hide something from this guy that you're around every day as well. So these managers sometimes just tell them, and they say, this is what's going on, but you can't talk about it. And I know that happens, with you as well in the hockey world, but I think that that would be interesting. Now, one of the things that fascinated me about your career recently was your embedding with the USA team, when they were selecting, and I imagine, doing what I do and talking to people about rumors, it must have been incredible to be on the inside of what we all kind of suspect is happening.
Yeah, no, that certainly was among the my favorite career moments. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I mean, like getting an inside glimpse of how the top hockey minds in the business think was a lot of fun. And to be honest, it was very impressive. What I saw was a group of people that were very passionate and were very competitive. Like, they worked hard at trying to build, that team, and they knew at the end of the day they would be criticized no matter who they took. It was David McNabb, who is the assistant general manager of the Anaheim Ducks, and I've known him since he was a scout. And I remember early in my career in the 1980s when he was a scout, and they named the must have been the '88 Olympic team. And I remember him telling me, no matter what you do, there has to be the best player who didn't make the team. and whenever and because of that, there's always going to be great debate about whether he should be on the team.
Right.
And so true. And now with social media being the way it is, you're set up to be crucified no matter who you pick or what you do. And and the problem with it is not that you shouldn't be subject to criticism, because that's fair game, but most of it now has become over the top and personal, and people see conspiracy when conspiracy isn't there. And like the stuff that was going on, like Bobby Ryan wasn't selected.
Yeah.
And on the stuff in Keith Yandle, well, you needed to be there. Like, there were people who stood up for Bobby Ryan, including Brian Burke, by the way, who ended up being criticized because of what he said in one of the meetings. But no one understands Bobby Ryan's strengths and weaknesses more than Brian. And it's not that he didn't but you're nitpicking here. You're trying to decide. Yeah. You're sorting out all the great players in American hockey, and it's just not a matter of I felt like when you're in a court and a lawyer says, okay, let's just all stipulate that we agree. Like, we probably should have walked in the room and everybody said, okay, let's all stipulate that these players are all great.
Right.
They're all great. There's not any one of them that
right.
But we got to pick the best ones. And the other thing that came out is there's a difference between taking the best players right in a team concept. And I remember at one point Paul Holmgren said to Peter Laviolette, he said, is Dan Bylsma going to put Bobby Ryan on the power play? And Peter said, well, these are the guys that we have ahead of him. And Paul said, well, if we're not going to put him on the power play, then we might not need him. Now, did that mean that Bobby Ryan was a poor hockey player? No. It just meant that, was he going to get any ice time? And, I thought the Dean Lombardi's presentation in defense of putting Keith Yandle on the team, like, it was so brilliantly put together. It really was like a summation to the jury. Like, when he was done, Brian Burke did say, if I'm ever charged with murder, I want Dean Lombardi defending me, because and that's what it was like all the time. Like, almost always, and it was never discussed, and there was no plan for it, but it almost felt like everybody sort of picked a guy and defended them and served as their lawyer. And, I remember when Dustin Byfuglien came up, Dale Talon talked about all of his strengths and about how popular he was with his teammates. And I think a lot of people were surprised at that, and I know I was, because he could be a little difficult with the media. So to hear Dale Talon and then Stan Bowman confirm that, hey, the guys love him, that was sort of fun. So I did really enjoy that assignment, and Scott Burnside and I, Scott of ESPN, I think we both enjoyed writing about that. It was one of the lengthier stories I've ever done, and it was just a lot of fun.
To me, it feels like you're almost in the girls' locker room. Like it's so you're in. You know what I mean? You're
I didn't feel like
uncomfortable. Like I would have felt like I'm not supposed to be here. Did that come up to you at all?
Yeah, no, I never felt like that. I felt, it's kind of hard to describe. Like, I just felt that, that they were giving us, it was a privilege that, we had the opportunity to see this. And to be honest, like, they got real comfortable with us real early. That's
the key to making like that work, right? I mean, that they get comfortable with you, because otherwise...
Yeah, and they did. Like I felt they believed that everything was going to be okay. And we ended up, as everyone knows, with one small problem. But I find it interesting that we had I don't know, 8, 10, 12 meetings, whatever it was, conference calls, and in the end we only had a disagreement on one quote and whether or not that it should have been in. And Scott I believed it should have been, and or at that moment he did. I don't know how he feels about it now.
Yeah.
And other people didn't see it that way. But it was such a small part of such a long process, and almost every bit of that process I would consider a very positive. Like it's just stunning to me the amount of criticism that was directed. Like people would have no idea. Like if they had been in there with me, there's no way they would walk out saying, all these guys are a bunch of idiots and all that. I mean,
right.
You just couldn't come away from that. What you'd come away thinking is, man, this is hard to pick this team. So yeah, and I find it interesting too. One of the people who are fans who are really critical, they're sitting down and they're putting this team together in 60 seconds.
Right.
Draw the lines, and they put 7 defensemen. And we watched them agonize over for 3 months, and multiple scouting things. Like they'd go see some of these guys, 6 and 8, 10 times, and spend hours. And at one point they brought in video of when they were making the final selections, Blake Wheeler, some of these guys. They broke down Keith Yandel, like all of his top plays, and we watched them and everything else. And yet some guy from Minnesota who jots it all down on a piece of paper, thinks that he has the right answer and these guys are all morons.
No, I mean, like you say, not only are they picking the best players, but these are the best executives in hockey. American executives. These are the top guys in that as well. And in that process, did you ever once, or I guess I could expand this to your entire career, have you ever once wanted to leave writing and become a general manager?
Well, I for sure. I mean, there were times when I've thought about that. I mean, we actually saw that happen. Gosh, now I'm not a general manager, but I'm drawing a complete blank, but there was a writer in Boston who ended up joining the management team in Minnesota.
Yeah.
In some capacity. Just terrible.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about too. Yeah, I can't think of it either. But this does happen. Not as much as you think it would. I mean, you've covered hockey for a long time. I mean, a great amount of experience in this field.
Yeah, I think I would have been tempted at some point if that had been the opportunity. I don't think there's ever any way that you could get a job as a GM, but if you could get something as working with a GM, certainly I think you'd be tempted. I bet there are a lot of writers who would do that, because what ends up happening is, basically, and I say this to aspiring writers all the time, it's not enough to like sports. You got to love the process of writing, and you got to. And by loving the process, I mean, if you're not experiencing some angst and some pain when you're writing a story, then you probably haven't written a good one. You need to appreciate that process and like it. You got to love the chase, and you got to love to compete. So when you've done that for a while, And you've been in one world, say my world or maybe baseball or everything else. I think you get to know so much about it that you become sort of intrigued by the thing. Okay, well, could I do anything else? So I never, just to going back, like I never really seriously thought about it. But there were a couple of GMs that I've known through the years who I always felt like, would I have been able to get on and do something there?
Yeah.
But the funny thing is I would never have wanted to be a PR guy for a team.
Right.
Would never even consider that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But being part, being part of the player decision is, when you talk to Jeff, it is an exciting thing, obviously, and being part of that whole process of building a Stanley Cup. I have a friend who recently left the agents, becoming an agent, to become an assistant GM because he wants a chance to win a Stanley Cup. Like we all cover the Stanley Cup, but
Right.
actually a chance to win the Stanley Cup, that to me seems like something that would be so intriguing for so many people.
Well, for sure. And I always say, I get to go to the finals every year, but I never get to win. I can't never win. But I always go to finals.
Yeah, you want that day. The day you bring the Stanley Cup back to Port Hurricane, back to Ypsilanti.
There's actually a story there too. What people don't realize now, but in the '80s, the passion and the notoriety of the Stanley Cup wasn't what it is now. Like, it used to be just on display in a hotel during the final. Like, I can remember in like 1987, the Cup being in the Westin Hotel in Edmonton, and it was surrounded by some ropes, but there was no line. I mean, people would come by and look at it and everything. And I remember being with Tom McMillan, who's now with the vice president of the Pittsburgh Penguins. He was a writer back then. Us. I'll say walking, but it was more stumbling home from Sherlock Holmes bar, which is across the street, in the wee hours. And there was like a 14-year-old boy, I'm exaggerating, guarding the cup, and we asked him whether we could look at it. And we hauled. I mean, there's nobody there. It's it's 2, 3 in the morning, and he moved it out from the ropes, and Tom and I sat on a chair and a couch there and sort of looked it over. And you can never do that now.
No, that's for sure. You never could.
Time and the cup, has just become so popular. It's bigger than Gretzky.
It's bigger than Gretzky. It's like the John Lennon quote, right?
It's
bigger than Gretzky. Yeah, now the last thing I wanted to touch on in this interview, and I also am writing a story for Hockey Buzz that's going to come out this weekend as well, of an interview I did with you during the finals, which is where I got a little bit more into some fun stories from your youth. So we'll definitely check that out. That'll be part of I'll probably post this along with that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about social media and how this has all changed things in journalism for you, because I know a lot of people are looking to the elder spokespeople of our hockey world to see where they think this is all heading and what matters and what doesn't matter now. You've embraced it pretty well. You were on Twitter. You were on Twitter early on, and you do a podcast obviously with us. So you're definitely. I admire the fact that you don't seem to want to be standing still in this thing.
No. What I say is I'm a dinosaur, but I'm standing up on 2 legs and I'm walking out of the muck. I'm trying to feed off the tall trees now.
Yeah.
You either have to. I remember years ago when I was doing one of my internships in college, working for a weekly chain, and I remember they asked me to go do a story on an old brick wall that was having to be torn down, and there was an 85 or a 90-year-old woman who was going to tell me the story of the wall and what it meant to the town and everything else. And I thought, okay, this is going to be about how we're losing a symbol of history, and she's going to be sad about it. And it couldn't have been farther from the truth. She talked about how you always have to move forward, and you have to respect history, but you can't live in the past. And that's sort of how I feel about this. Like, people think I started on a typewriter. I started sending stories on a telecopier that was 6 minutes a page. You didn't want to write the fourth page because that meant you were going to be there 24 minutes instead of 18 minutes after the game. And then I started on a Radio Shack computer where you could see only 3 lines of copy, and you had couplers where you had to hold them up like old rabbit ears on television. So I've seen dramatic changes in journalism. So to me, even though it changes the way that I do things, it doesn't feel like it's something that I can't do. And the other interesting aspect is I think none of us know what it's going to look like in 5 or 6 years. I believe there'll always be journalism.
Yes, I do too.
And I was around in the 70s when we made the transition from the toy department. That's what sports used to be looked at. And you alluded to it, but it was certainly true in the before 1970s that it was almost like and this was before my time, but I had the sense from talking to older guys that there was they were an extension of the team. The sports writers, they knew everything. They didn't rock the boat. Nobody was taking bribes or anything, but they just weren't as critical. And in the 1970s, there was a move to do a lot more investigative reporting in sports, and that was sort of my generation. That was the group that did that, and that changed everything. That was a big major change, and we started to get more aggressive and started writing more news stories. And now we're entering a new phase where we're doing more analysis, and the only thing I worry about is we're retraining. And I know you disagree on this, but I'm fearful we're retraining readers to expect all of their news to be delivered in 140 character segments. And I know from watching, I have kids who are in the 24 to 30 range, and I know that's their expectation now of how news is delivered. And I worry that we're sort of developing a group of people who won't ever read lengthier pieces. So I hope I'm wrong on that, but but if that's the case, then that's what it'll be, and we'll.
I disagree to a degree, but I agree with part of it. But I do say I'm a believer that the passionate people will continue to be the passionate people. The people who want to read the long form stories will always read the long form stories. I think the 40 character people are the people who are casual people about something, and they're passionate about something else. And there's so many things to be passionate about in this world. You might like hockey, but that's not the thing you want to dive deep into. You want to know what's going on, but you don't want to dive deep into it. There's only so many things we can dive deep into, right, in this world. So I think that's the big decision on people. But at the same time, I think that what Twitter allows is people to just continue to still keep up with things without having to dive deep. And I think that's a positive thing. There's so many elements of it, and obviously we'll do entire shows on this, I'm sure, on the Cranky Hockey Writers on elements of this. But yeah, I've been impressed by how you've handled it and how you've managed to get and I've watched you develop on Twitter. Your personality's developed through Twitter, through the podcast, through XM interviews and stuff like that, and just. It's good to see, the real, in my opinion, like the Kevin Allen that I know coming out in the world, of people getting a chance to see you and hear your opinions, because they are always interesting and they are always very, unbiased, and that's still kind of rare. Do you worry about that part of things, I guess, in the internet? I mean, you've seen a lot of people now there's a lot more fandom, I guess, than ever before.
Yeah, well, it's. I've always felt like I think as a parent, one of the things I always wanted my kids to know is always entertain the possibility that you may be wrong. Right. And I think that is the toughest thing for a human being, that they always proceed as if they're right and there's no chance they're wrong. And that's also how I try to approach my writing. I think there's a great tendency in the perspective writing and the analysis that we do is we have to come out strong in our opinions, and I get that, but there's always a chance you're going to be wrong. Yeah. And I think there is a way to write authoritatively, but also make note of the other side. And the biggest problem is, and that's the difference as well, in the 1970s, our readers as a group, because the watchdog function of journalism was just starting to develop, and people liked the idea that somebody was watching,
Right.
Teams, the government, business world, everybody was on them and looking out for their best interests. But now we've sort of, gotten to the point that people don't want both sides of an issue. They go to websites that reflect their, perspective, and I still believe that you do have to try to present, both sides. When I'm, writing a trade story, even though I now have to say who I think, made the best won the trade or made the, the best move. I do try to decide, okay, well, this is how they saw it. This is how
they made the move. And and I agree with you. And I think that is something that the internet sort of feeds into, is that if you don't come out strong on the internet, especially on Twitter, it's almost as if the internet smells fear, and that's why people are afraid of that. People are afraid of that if they think if you're coming off wishy-washy or if you're coming off unbiased, and they're just going to attack you. And yet you've managed to not. I mean, I'm sure you get attacked. Everybody gets attacked on the internet, but you managed to really. That's a fine line that you must.
Yeah, no, and I try to walk that line, and it is, but the problem is, and again, it comes down to I don't want to ever apologize that's how I feel about things. Like, I don't believe anything is black and white. I believe everything is gray, and I have felt that way my entire life. I've always been able to see both sides of it, and I try to weigh the pros and cons of everything, and then make an intelligent decision. But I do always entertain the possibility that I may be wrong. That's the way life is. There's no absolutes. I once said to a GM, at the end of the day, no matter how experienced you are, no matter how many decisions you make, it still comes down, all of your decisions, to a guess. Whether you're Ken Holland or you're Glenn Sather, or you're Dean Lombardi, it just doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, when it comes to sports and competitive things, you're still just making an educated guess, because there are no absolutes. When you sign a player, when you make a trade, when you draft a guy, when you decide which goalie you're going to play, when you put your guys to the lines, you're only guessing. Now, their guesses are usually founded in reason and experience and everything else, but they're still only guessing.
Still guesses, I know. And I vouch for the fact that you actually do approach life this way, because there have been times when I've written things that I know you don't think are anywhere near reality, and or you've talked to a general manager who said that they're nowhere near reality, and yet you've never come at me from that angle. You've never come at me and say, you're totally, completely 100% wrong. You'll just say, wow, it really seems like you're 100% wrong, but you're not one to. You still always leave that open. You always leave that option out there.
Well, you might be wrong. I mean, I've had GMs, say to me. I mean, I've joked with Ken Holland. I don't mind saying his name of the Red Wings. Is that he basically said that if you actually wrote that I actually thought about that trade, you'd be right, because he said, in my opinion, I look at every scenario. Like, I don't just dismiss it out of hand. I look and say, okay, A, do I need this guy? B, what would it cost me? And C, do I have any desire to make a move? And 98% of the time the answer is, well, I don't need to go there. But sometimes you do. But a good GM looks at all possibilities.
Right. There are plenty of possibilities, and and that to me is that is why you've developed these relationships with these general managers. That is super special, and that's the other dichotomy of you, is that you could do my job way better than I do my job, but you're not, because you have way more information, but you're not a rumor person. And it's an interesting thing to hold back on all the information that you have. And you've never given me, just on the record, completely honestly, I've never gotten a single rumor from you. That's not what our relationship's ever been about. So, but you have plenty of information.
Well, I do, but one of the things is, and this is going to be hard for us to discuss because that's your life is rumors. But I've learned also through the years, like USA Today, we've never printed rumors. We've opened up a little bit. and we can talk because we do some speculation now. But unfortunately, I now I realize through my long history in the league that 98% or 99% of the stuff that gets talked about just never comes to fruition. So it's more for me is I think it's just an exercise. I know it's good entertainment. I respect that. People like to talk about it. I mean, sports are an opiate of the masses. It's like drinking or playing games. It should be fun. So if people want to go down that path, then let them have an avenue. You're the avenue for that. I mean, I know because I know you well that your rumors come from people. You don't sit around and make them up. I know that. I know that to be true. But I think that 99% of them are not going to come true because very few trades. So I don't put my energy into that.
Right.
That is, but there are people who want to hear what you have to say. So I'm fine with that. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's what you do. But that's it's not worth my energy because I deal in what will happen and what has happened.
Right.
Deal in what might happen or what could happen.
That's a great way of putting it. That's exactly it. And
that's why I don't do any rumors because I'm pretty darn sure most of them, nearly all of them, are not going to come true.
Yeah. No, and it's a well put out point, and I've said many times that I realize the same thing. My idea of it is, as we've talked about on many occasions, is to sort of give clues, and I don't think that necessarily a rumor. I don't look at a rumor as much as a rumor as much as I look at it as a clue. If someone's talking about this particular player, well, why do they want left wings? Why would that's how I'm looking at it in my head. So what are they thinking long term? Where is that playing out? How's that going about? And that, like you say, it's speculation, and it's all about discussions, and it's enjoyable. But when things don't happen, and I deal with that all the time.
In the old days when we had rules against rumors and everything, I still found ways in order to do it. And the best example of that is when Chris Kunitz came to the Pittsburgh Penguins. If you look at the week before it happened, I wrote a column where I speculated about the type of they needed to play with Sidney Crosby, and I knew this was in the works, so I just speculated on. Like wouldn't Kunitz would be just a perfect style of player, and then of course a week later, that's how I would deal with that. But in that case, I had knowledge that that was in the work, but I wasn't absolutely positive of that. Because those trades can fall apart, as you well know, but probably better than most. They don't.
Well, it's a very Yeah, for sure. And I think we froze a little bit there, but I think we're okay.
It froze a little bit, so we had a little bit of.
The hockey world doesn't want us to go into rumors any further, and I think we've got a good. The hockey gods are stopping us. But yeah, I think that this is wonderful, Kevin. And again, such congratulations. I am so honored to be able to be up at Toronto and join you in this whole celebration. And my gosh, I can't think of one thing that I'd rather do. So, and one person who deserves it more. So, congratulations, and keep on doing what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think it's just funny how our friendship is. It's hard to believe it's been 10 years now already, and we mostly see each other in the Stanley Cup Final when we often eat breakfast, and and it's kind of fascinating when you think about it. You're a rumor guy, and I'm a mainstream guy, and our jobs are completely different, but we always seem to have a lot of fun.
And people Berkey and those have always had a good time with that too. Like, what are those guys sitting together? We've heard that, and it's fun. It is fun. So I look forward to Toronto, and love the fact that you're a part of the podcast and all that. And and also, guys, I have about a dozen Kevin Allen books here, so and they're all just phenomenal. And you've written, we didn't even get into that, but I will get into that in my story as well, and we'll put some links to some of these books because that's where you do get the chance to see Kevin Allen as a storyteller, and that's what I love about it very much. So thanks, and we'll talk soon.
All right, sounds good.